Hello and welcome to ACI's e-learning webinar series. Thank you for joining me today. My name is Jasmine Saidi Keenert and I will be your presenter. And the topic, as you can see, is on Colombia, its education system, as well as opportunities for student mobility and partnership. So welcome and thank you for joining me today. We have a few housekeeping reminders. Many of you are always interested in receiving a copy of the presentation, the recording, and slides. We will have this available after the end of the webinar. We will not only post a link for the webinar on our website, we will also email the link to you. In case you don't receive either or cannot access it via our website, please feel free to email us at acei@acei-global.org and indicate that you wish to receive a recording, link to the recording. And finally, the attendees, you will be muted throughout the webinar presentation, but if you have any questions, please go ahead and type them in the sidebar. We cannot begin discussing Colombia without first acknowledging the historic peace agreement between the Colombian government and the now former guerrilla group known as FARC. On November 24, 2016, the Colombian government and the guerrilla group FARC signed a final peace agreement, officially ending a 50-year-long conflict that claimed over 260,000 lives and displaced more than 7 million people. FARC had begun as an armed wing of the Communist Party in 1964, and under the peace agreement, FARC has been relaunched as a political party. Of course, the conditions of the peace agreement which gives FARC a free pass has many Colombians upset for having lost loved ones to kidnappings and bloodshed. But it's a time of forgiveness and moving forward. And the nearly 5 decades-long internal conflict between the government and FARC has had a defining impact on all aspects of social and economic development in Colombia, including education. And in the presentation today, we will look at seeing how Colombia has made some major commitments in revamping, boosting its education system. What you will find of interest to note is that the former president of Colombia, who you will see in this image, the gentleman that's facing us on the left of the screen, Juan Manuel Santos, was educated in the United States. After he finished his studies at the Naval Academy in Colombia, he came to the U.S. He attended University of Kansas, where he earned a BA in economics and business, and he later went to Harvard University, where he received his master's in public administration. Over the past 2 decades, the Colombian education system has undergone a fundamental transformation. And the most visible outcome is the impressive expansion of access at all levels as a result of ambitious policies that tackle barriers to enrollment and bring education services to every corner of the country. Truly, Colombia, as is quoted on this slide, has undergone a silent revolution, and it's gone unnoticed by the international community. And our hope is through today's presentation, we can bring the spotlight onto Colombia so that you can see the developments that have happened and the eagerness and openness of the country in pursuing its higher education endeavors outside of Colombia. There have been an increasing focus on learning outcomes that's resulted in important reforms to professionalize the teaching workforce, introducing measures of performance across the system. Colombia, has made a pledge to become the most educated country in Latin America by 2025. Colombia is the 5th largest country in Latin America almost the size of Texas, with a population of over 46 million. The country's official language is Spanish, and 90% of the population is Roman Catholic. Its government is a presidential republic, and its capital is Bogota. In recent years, the Colombian economy has grown at rates that many OECD countries can only aspire to. Poverty has been reduced significantly, and the big reform initiatives of the government have contributed to improving the economic and social environment. As of the 2017, the GDP figures for Colombia was $711.6 billion US dollars. Some of the major achievements of Colombia are shown in the enrollment figures that have risen sharply at all levels. And I'm going to go to the next slide to demonstrate that for you. This is at the secondary level. And what has happened is the time students spend in education has increased by 2 years, and participation in early childhood and going all the way to tertiary education has more than doubled, from 20% to 40% at early childhood education and 24 to 50% at the tertiary level. And this slide demonstrates the ratio of enrollment at the tertiary level. So what can these achievements be attributed to? Many. There's several factors. First, strategies to modernize early childhood education, upper secondary, and tertiary education have been introduced to set clear goals, a common framework, and standards for education services. Second, reforms have been implemented to professionalize the teaching profession by raising the standards for entry and investing in skills development. Third, new governance and funding arrangements have laid the foundation for a system that's more efficient and meets the needs of a very diverse country. And finally, the development of strong information systems and multiple performance assessments have enabled a more evidence-based approach to policymaking. Colombia has an 11-year system of elementary and secondary education. The elementary cycle is 5 years, followed by 4 years of lower secondary and 2 years of upper secondary. At the tertiary level, Colombia has universities and non-university higher education institutions. At universities, there are 3 levels: undergraduate or professional, profesional, graduate or master's, maestria or magister, and doctoral or PhD, the doctorate. Non-university higher education institutions are technical institutions as well as university-level institutions which offer technical, known as técnico, and technologist, known as tecnólogo, degree programs. This chart demonstrates the progression of students and the official school ages beginning at pre-primary, early childhood, through primary, secondary, and tertiary levels of education. The governing body that regulates all levels of education in Colombia is the Ministry of Education, Ministerio de Educación Nacional. The ministry outlines the learning objectives and subject areas for each grade level, but the schools are allowed to organize their own specific study plans based on the needs of their communities. There are 32 states, departamentos, that are charged with administering education in accordance with the ministry's regulations. And the state authority is the Secretary of Education, Secretaria de Educación. So some quick facts on Colombian education. Education from grades 1 to 9 is free and compulsory. but Colombia is set to make its upper secondary education, which is years 10 and 11, compulsory by year 2030. The Ministry of Education allows 2 calendar years for the school year. One is the February to November calendar, which is a 2-semester cycle, and the other is the September to June calendar year, also a 2-semester cycle. Both follow a 198-day school year. And most departments follow the February to November school calendar. At the tertiary level, the number of students, programs, and institutions has increased extraordinarily. The gross enrollment rate is now close to 50%, double that of a decade ago. Disadvantaged students now have a greater chance to obtain a tertiary diploma or degree through a well-established student loan scheme and recent scholarship initiatives for the talented. Tuition fees at the university levels are also commensurate on the student's socioeconomic background. Although the language of instruction is Spanish, this is very important to note, is that the Ministry of Education launched in 2004 the National Bilingual Program by adding English as a foreign language to the overall national curriculum. Colombia aims to increase academic and labor mobility of its people through increased English language skills. It sees this as key to improving the country's global competitiveness. Today, English is part of the state curriculum, and bilingualism is a criteria for accreditation of programs of higher education. Students in Colombia typically start school at age 6. Primary education is 5 years, runs through grades 1 through 5, and on completion of the 5th year, they receive their Certificado de Educación Primaria, the Certificate of Primary Education. Secondary education is 6 years, divided into 2 cycles, known as the Educación Secundaria Básica, which is the lower secondary, and Educación Media, upper secondary. Lower secondary, or Educación Secundaria Básica, is 4 years and covers grades 6 through 9, and students start at age 11. The curriculum is standard for students at all lower secondary schools and similar to primary schools, with the addition of technical subjects and a foreign language. And on completion of the lower secondary cycle, students receive the Certificado de Estudios de Bachillerato Básico, or the Certificado Conclusión del Ciclo Básico. Students enter upper secondary education by age 15. This is a 2-year cycle and covers grades 10 through 11. At the upper secondary level, students can choose between different tracks, which are the academic track, the Bachillerato Académico, or the technical track, Bachillerato en Tecnología o Aplicado. In the next slide, we'll see the various vocational specialties in the technical track. But in the academic track, students are given instruction in general knowledge in arts, humanities, social sciences, math, and sciences. The technical track is focused a little bit more on vocational subjects and is designed to prepare students for the workforce. So here's a list of the vocational fields in the technical track. On completion of either the academic or the technical track, students receive the diploma known as the Bachiller, which provides access to higher education. The Título de Bachiller from either track is equivalent to U.S. high school graduation. We have a sample of a Bachiller Académico issued by the Secretary of Education. Grading scale for upper secondary for pre-2009 is shown in this slide. At the upper secondary, the grades were reported as descriptors. Post-2009, this is the new grading scale. It is still reported as descriptors. There are no numbers or percentages. Once the students have graduated from upper secondary school in Colombia, if they're intending to continue their studies at the tertiary level, they would need to pass the state exam, Examen de Estado. The examination is administered by the Instituto Colombiano para la Evaluación de la Educación, and it's offered twice a year. As far as what are the acceptable exam results, these do vary according to institutional policies of universities. In Colombia, higher education is available at public and private institutions. Higher education is divided into 3 levels, beginning with pregrado or undergraduate degree programs, followed by postgrado, the graduate degree programs, and then doctorado, the doctoral degree programs. Colombia does have an institutional accreditation practice, which is voluntary. The Ministry of Education is responsible for the accreditation of higher ed institutions, and those that satisfy all requirements receive the official registration, Registro Calificado. In Colombia, there are 4 types of institutions that offer tertiary education. These institutions are technical professional institutions, known as Instituciones Profesionales Técnicas, which offer 2 to 3 year technician programs. The technological institutions, Instituciones Tecnológicas, offer 3 to 4 year programs, and university institutions, Instituciones Universitarios, offer first year cycle, pregrado, undergraduate programs, leading to the título profesional or licenciado, as well as technician and technological degree programs. Universities, universidades, are the higher education institutions that offer not only undergraduate, but also graduate, master's, specialist, and doctoral degree programs. At the undergraduate pregrado level, Colombia offers 3 types of degree programs. Técnico Profesional, which is a professional technician, a 2 to 3 year program. Then there is the Technologist, Tecnólogo program, which is 3 to 4 years, and the professional title Licentiate, the Título Profesional or Licenciado, typically between 4 to 6 years, depending on the field of study. It is this degree, the Título Profesional or the Título de Licenciado or Grado, the degree of Licenciado or Licentiate, that is required for graduate admission at Colombian institutions of higher ed. We have a few samples of licenciado credentials as well as professional credentials at this level. This is a licenciado en educación básica, a licentiate in education, excuse me, teaching education at the lower secondary level, offered by a university. Next is a university degree, undergraduate degree in industrial engineering, the título in industrial engineering. This is a professional title, also awarded by a university. This next slide shows a professional degree, the first professional degree in medicine, and the title would be the Título de Médica y Cirujana. So this is a medical doctor with specialty of surgery. At the graduate postgraduate level, postgrado, Colombia offers three types of degree programs. There is the specialista, or specialist, which can be anywhere from 1 semester to 4 years, depending on whether the specialization is in an academic or medical area. The academic specialization program can be 1 to 2 semesters in length, while the medical programs last up to 4 years. The next graduate program is the master's degree, magister, which is 1 to 2 years and is required for admission to doctoral studies. And the doctoral program, or PhD, is 2 to 5 years in length. Here's a sample of a Título de Magister, Master of Science in Biomedical. And next is the Título de Doctor, the doctorate degree. At the tertiary level, institutions are nationally mandated to use this 5-point grading scale, which makes our work as credential evaluators a lot easier. There are no descriptors at this level as there were at the upper secondary. So now let's look at Colombia and its potentials for student exchange and partnerships with U.S. institutions. Let's take a look at these 2016-2017 figures that show almost 8,000 students traveled from Colombia to the U.S. to study. This is approximately about 0.1% increase compared to the previous years. And the next chart will show the percentage of Colombian students studying at undergraduate, graduate, and those who are carrying their, completing their OPT. The preferred states for Colombian students are California, Florida, Illinois, Massachusetts, New York, and that's it, I'm sorry. I think I've repeated Florida twice, and Illinois. The fields of studies in most demand are those that are focused on business administration, management, banking, marketing, finance, and engineering. According to the Institute of International Education, Colombia is ranked 22nd in the world and 3rd among South American countries after Brazil and Venezuela for sending students to the U.S. Unfortunately, with the current domestic problems with Venezuela, that number has changed. But it still keeps Colombia in a competitive ranking. So you may ask, why U.S.? Number one, proximity. U.S. colleges and universities remain the preferred overseas destination for Colombian students, despite significant competition from other countries like UK, Canada, Australia, Spain, France, and Argentina. There are several factors that make the U.S. a leading destination, and chief among them is higher employment opportunities after graduation when students return back to Colombia. With the global job market becoming increasingly competitive, the number of Colombian undergrads and grad students in the U.S. has been growing over the past 5 academic years. And this is partially due to the fact that in Colombia it's difficult to obtain a high-level position within the government or an important national multinational company without proficiency in English and or a master's degree. And as evidenced by the former president of Colombia's degrees, you can see that he had not just a bachelor's, but a master's from 2 U.S. institutions. Also, a degree from a U.S. university can make job applicants that much more competitive in the Colombian workplace. There is also the high quality of U.S. higher education that is very much revered and respected by Colombians. And of course, the renewed push by the Colombian government to encourage English bilingualism. Students see studying in the U.S. as a chance to improve and strengthen their English skills. Another reason is that Colombian businesses are increasing their presence and operation in the U.S. and bolstering the need not just for English speakers, but for Colombians with actual living experience in the U.S. and who have knowledge of U.S. business practices and American culture in general. The U.S. Embassy in Bogota supports efforts to increase the number of Colombian students studying in the U.S. by supporting technology projects such as Ed 24/7, virtual advisor in Spanish, and there are various micro scholarships for English language studies. Additionally, the 100,000 Strong in the Americas Innovation Fund seeks to increase the number of Latin American students studying in the U.S. and the number of U.S. students studying in Latin America. Partnerships between universities in the U.S. and higher education institutions in the Western Hemisphere are increasing the student exchange opportunities and strengthening regional education cooperation throughout the Americas. And under government-to-government or private agreements, both public and private universities in Colombia have developed partnerships with universities in the U.S., Europe, and Latin America. Priority is given to postgraduate programs for training professors as well as research to enhance teaching. U.S. Commercial Services collaborates with Education USA offices in Colombia to support these various education fairs that include participation of U.S. boarding schools, universities, and ELS institutions to promote their programs in Colombia. Just this past weekend, we were invited by the Embassy of Colombia that hosted its first fair on the campus of University of Illinois, Chicago. This was their first attempt to bring awareness to Colombian higher education, as well as services offered here in the United States by academic institutions, private enterprises, evaluation agencies, translation companies. So it was an opportunity for Colombians in the U.S. to become more familiar with services provided here to assist them with further education, licensing, employment, but also bring that sort of awareness about Colombia to the U.S. Participants. So this was a clear demonstration of the efforts that the government of Colombia is taking into building this sort of a education and professional bridge between their country and the U.S. Most scholarships are awarded through two institutions. Colombia has one group called ICETEX, which stands for Colombian Institute for Educational Loans and Technical Studies Abroad, and then there's Colfuturo. ICETEX scholarships are both for in-country and study abroad students, and in 2017, my numbers show that it awarded more than 250 scholarships for master's degrees, PhD, and ESL programs in the U.S. Colfuturo is a nonprofit organization that provides funds to Colombian professionals and students who want to study abroad at the graduate level. In 2017, Colfuturo awarded almost 1,300 scholarships for master's and PhD programs, and about 300 of them were for programs in the U.S. Colfuturo has agreements with universities in the U.S. such as Carnegie Mellon, Columbia University, Duke, Cornell, University of Florida, American University, Purdue, Tulane, NYU, University of Chicago, University of Texas, Harvard, among others. Although the exchange rate is still a big factor for Colombian students wanting to study in the U.S., demand and interest remain strong. International education is highly valued in the Colombian workforce, And a recent survey of employees found that nearly 60% preferred to hire people who had earned advanced degrees abroad. For U.S. schools and ELS institutions, private and bilingual schools in Colombia offer good recruiting opportunities. Schools are interested in sending groups to study in the U.S. schools for periods that may vary between 3 weeks to 3 to 4 months. The goal of these short-term programs is mainly to acquire and improve English skills. The government's objective of promoting bilingualism in Colombia through its program called Colombia Very Well is to increase the number of high school grads with an intermediate level of English to 185,000 students in 10 years. English language institutions may wish to explore expanding their operations in Colombia by offering their programs directly to the students in country. At the higher education level, private universities also offer important recruitment opportunities for undergraduate and postgrad programs. U.S. universities should make initial contact with the officials of foreign relations in each university in order to introduce U.S. universities and their programs and areas of specialization. Colombian universities are interested in having agreements with U.S. universities that offer dual degree programs for their students. This can be accomplished through a combination of 2 or 3 years at the local university and 1 to 2 years at the U.S. university. In Colombia, there is a strong network of Education USA centers administering language programs and doing extensive outreach around the country. Education fairs are one of the most effective ways to recruit Colombian students. Colombia has a few education fairs throughout the year. If you visit the Education USA website, you will find a list of upcoming fairs. This is the U.S. Education Center in Colombia. Beyond the economic implications, the availability of educational services carries even greater significance in terms of improving general living conditions in Colombia. A well-educated Colombian population is seen to be vital to the country's economic growth and global competitiveness over the long term. And U.S. educational services will also expose more Colombians to American culture and vice versa, further strengthening the ties between the two countries. We have a number of useful links for you in this presentation slides. And again, you will receive a link to this complete recording with the slides. So you will have access to this information. So in closing, Colombia's transition towards peace and higher levels of development depends on many factors. But none will be more important to the country's future than its ability to build a strong and inclusive education system. It still has some work to do. It needs to close the large disparities between urban and rural areas that need to be a priority, and it has become a priority for the government so that they could enjoy lasting peace. And as the peace process solidifies in Colombia and the country becomes more stable and prosperous, the U.S. is in a good position to see a potential increase in Colombian students. So this brings our presentation on the Colombian education system and opportunities to a close. You can always contact us by email with any questions you may have. And as I said, if you have any questions right now, you can also feel free to type them in the sidebar. Okay. I see. Well, there's one question that says, are the desired short-term programs for credit or just for strengthening their English? This particular answer, I'm going to be not very specific because it does depend on the institution in Colombia and their actual intent. But if we're looking at secondary schools that wish to have their students come to the U.S. for these short-term programs, it's definitely to strengthen their English skills. As for university programs, those would be subject to the sort of agreements, one-on-one agreements that an institution may wish to make with their counterpart here in the U.S. And then at that time, you may be able to determine the content and breadth of the program as if it will be part of a credit or a non-credit intensive English school program. There's a question about Col Futura. The question is, I was told that Col Futura only allows loans and grants for approved institutions. Do you know what the process is? That is correct. It is for approved institutions. I would not be able to really give you specifics. My suggestion would be to contact Col Futura directly or the U.S. Education USA office to assist you in putting the two of you in touch. There is a link that I have provided to colfutura.org, which will provide detailed information about their requirements. Thank you for that question. Another question. Do you have any samples of a double degree program in Colombia? At this time, I do not, but I welcome anyone who is on this call, if you do, to kindly share a redacted version of the document of a double degree program, and I will then be able to add that to the samples we have here and share with those of you in attendance. Let me see if there's any. Okay. Another good question. To do kind of the matchmaking with Colombian universities with the U.S. Foreign Commercial Service, or would it be the U.S. Commercial Foreign Service or EdUSA? I recommend both. I recommend both, and I do recommend working with the EdUSA offices. They're super eager to build these relationships, and they're very knowledgeable and have had this experience. So do get in touch with EdUSA, but the Foreign Commercial Service is also a good source as a backup. Well, this brings us to the end of the questions, unless there's anything else. Again, I know how it is. Once the presentation ends and you've kind of let things sink in, you may have some more questions. So feel free to contact me directly. My email is Jasmine, Jasmin, @acei-global.org. And I will be happy to answer your questions, or at least, connect you with the right source who will be able to assist you. Again, if anyone has any good sample documents you wish to send and share on Colombian education credentials that you've received, make sure you redact them. There's no identifying information of the applicants, and we'll be happy to add them to this webinar presentation for future reference. Thank you, everybody, for joining me today. One last question before we go. This is Yuriko. Hello, Yuriko. Without any governmental or non-governmental funds, can Colombian students typically afford U.S. education? Well, that's a yes and no. It really depends on their, socioeconomic standing in the country. But it seems as though the support that is best guaranteed is through the government or non-governmental funds. Again, the currency ratio is not as strong for them, so it is probably more preferable for the students to seek the governmental funding. But the support is there. The backing of the government is there for students to pursue higher education overseas. Thank you again. I appreciate your attendance. We're cutting this a little shorter than our allotted 1 hour, but sometimes short is good. Okay. Thank you so very much. Have a wonderful rest of the day. Stay tuned for future webinars on this topic. We really appreciate it. Bye-bye.